You know, the book of Revelation, for centuries, it's been this source of endless fascination, and let's be real, a lot of confusion. But what if the key to unlocking this notoriously difficult text isn't about trying to predict the future? What if it's actually about understanding the past? Well, today, we're going to dive deep into the original historical and cultural context that I think completely transforms Revelation from some impenetrable prophecy into a powerful message of hope.
So how are we going to do that? First, we'll tackle why Revelation just feels so unreadable to most of us. Then, we're going to dig into something called the problem of canon. Basically, how the way the Bible was put together actually stripped away some vital context. From there, we'll uncover the echoes of a foundational story that every single person in the original audience would have known by heart. And that leads us to the scriptural template that just unlocks the whole book, reframing it as this incredible story of hope.
All right, so an unreadable book. For so many people, opening Revelation feels like you're stepping into the series of just bizarre, totally disjointed visions. The timeline is all over the place, it jumps back and forth, characters pop in and out, and if you try to follow it like a normal story, it feels pretty much impossible. But here's the thing, that apparent chaos, it isn't a flaw, it's actually a deliberate choice and it's essential to the book's purpose.
And this right here really highlights our fundamental mistake. See, we try to read Revelation like it's a modern novel, expecting a linear plot that goes from point A to B to C. But it was never, ever meant to be read that way. It belongs to a completely different literary world, a whole different genre called apocalyptic literature. And this kind of writing doesn't build a plot. Instead, it drives home one single powerful point over and over again through these recurring thematic scenes.
So, what's the crucial takeaway here? Revelation wasn't written to be a chronological play-by-play of the future. It was crafted as a series of really powerful, symbolic vignettes, and they were designed specifically to bring comfort and encouragement to a real community that was suffering intensely. That repetition we see wasn't meant to confuse people, it was meant to reinforce the message, to hammer it home.
Okay, so to really understand that original audience and get inside their heads, we have to take a step back and look at how the Bible itself was put together. Because the very process of deciding which books made the cut, a process called canonization, it actually removed some of the most crucial context we need to make sense of it all.
This analogy, honestly, it just nails it. It gets right to the heart of what was happening at the Council of Nicaea around 300 AD. We might imagine this quiet, scholarly, peaceful gathering, but the reality, it was a year-long, deeply political, and pretty contentious process. You had different factions all fighting for influence, debating what the final shape of Christian scripture would even look like.
And just to get a sense of the scale of this whole debate, just look at the numbers. The council wasn't picking from just a handful of texts. No, they were looking at a huge library of writings. There were at least 56 different gospels, letters, and apocalypses on the table, all of them contenders for what would become the New Testament.
But get this, after all those long debates and all those votes, only 26 books actually made it into the final version. More than half of the texts they were considering were ultimately excluded from the canon. And this is the result we're living with today. That decision meant leaving behind documents that would have given us essential cultural and theological context. I mean, the very background information that would make a book like Revelation so much clearer to someone reading it thousands of years later.
So, with that in mind, let's try to step into the world of the people Revelation was actually written for. We're talking about first-century Jewish Christians. This is a community facing intense, life-threatening persecution under the immense power of the Roman Empire.
For this audience, their entire worldview, everything they believed, was shaped by one foundational story, the Exodus. Their most important cultural and religious touchstone was celebrating Passover every single year, commemorating that moment God miraculously liberated their ancestors from slavery in Egypt. This wasn't just some ancient history lesson for them. It was their defining story of hope. It was who they were.
So, this story gave them this powerful template for understanding their own suffering. When they found themselves facing a new, oppressive empire in Rome, their minds immediately went back to this story. It taught them that persecution, no matter how awful it was temporary, and that it would ultimately end in God's divine rescue.
And now we get to the core of the whole mystery. That bizarre, repetitive, and honestly, pretty terrifying structure of punishments you see in Revelation, well, it's not random at all. It's not some new invention. It is a direct callback to a text that this original audience would have known by heart.
So first, let's just look at the pattern itself. The author, John,
He structures God's judgment in 4 very distinct groups of 7. You have the 7 seals being broken, the 7 trumpets being blown, the 7 thunders roaring, and the 7 bowls of wrath being poured out. It's a crystal clear pattern, 4 sets of 7 escalating plagues.
So that raises the big question, right? Why this specific pattern? Why 4 distinct groups of 7? This is a highly unusual structure, and it's not something the author John just made up out of thin air. It is a direct literary borrowing, a quotation really, from the Hebrew scriptures that his audience would have recognized in a heartbeat.
And the source is found right there, in Leviticus chapter 26. This chapter, which itself is retelling the Exodus story, explicitly outlines 4 escalating sets of 7-fold punishments for disobedience. Now, for John's audience, who heard these scriptures read aloud in their synagogues year after year, that 4 times 7 pattern in Revelation would have been an unmistakable echo of a text they knew inside and out.
Okay, so once you see this Leviticus template, it completely transforms the meaning of Revelation. I mean, everything shifts. What appears to us, the modern reader, as a book of endless fear and punishment was, for its original audience, a powerful message of profound comfort and ultimate hope.
Let's just put the 2 readings side by side. Without the historical context, the plagues in Revelation look like a terrifying, never-ending prophecy of future doom. But for those first readers, seeing that clear pattern from Leviticus and the Exodus meant they already knew how the story ended. It meant that their current suffering, just like the suffering back in Egypt, was only one part of a much larger story that they knew for a fact concluded with God saving his people.
So, in the end, what if Revelation was never really meant to be a detailed roadmap of the apocalypse? What if it was a culturally coded message of hope, written in a symbolic language its audience would immediately get? A promise that, for those who were suffering under the boot of a brutal empire, God was going to make things right, just as he had done before. Maybe the point was never about being afraid of the end, but about having faith in a new beginning.